Youth is a time of joy, of discovery, of the excitement of learning, of rapid personal evolution, and of cultivating social consciousness. It is the grooming of a nation's future, a crucial potential point of intervention to cultivate the skills, the values, and a commitment to others that India and Indians need for the future. Today, we're increasingly asking ourselves if the education we give to our young is up to that challenge. Are we compromising the pursuit of excellence out of a misplaced fear of elitism, reducing all education to the lowest common denominator? India has indeed come a long way since the days of the Gurukuls and madrasas, but is it indeed a long way? India inherited a system of education from the British that was small and reflected an inherent inequity, designed to create a meritocracy to serve colonial rule. But have we been able to climb out of blaming the past for the ills of the present, to create a future for our young and for ourselves? The need for a literate population and universal education, at least up to age 14, was enshrined in the Constitution and incorporated in the 5-year plans. But is education mere literacy? Today, more than half of us are illiterate and cannot even sign our names.
Well, there most definitely is a crisis. One evidence of it is that after so many years, only 1/3 of the people are literate. The rest are illiterate. And how can you build a modern country unless everybody is literate?
I don't feel the word crisis is the correct word. We have been in a path, we have been in a trend which is now becoming increasingly critical. To my mind, the most serious situation as it prevails today is in the area of primary education. And if you want to call it crisis, yes, I'll go along with you that there is a very grave crisis which has been building on for decades, ever since independence, I would say. And now it seems to have assumed a proportion which is so large that no one seems to know what to do about it.
You see, what is happening is that we evolved a strategy of development around 50 or so. Then we refined it further in the second 5-year plan. And we have been following it since. Now it has done some good without question. But I think it's so very limited as compared to the demands of our economy that we have to seriously examine the question. Can we go on with this? And as more than one person has said, the bias has been in favor of industrialization and the rural areas have been neglected.
The many plans and policies adopted by the government ever since independence have always emphasized the eradication of illiteracy. The target up to the year 1995 is to make at least 80% of us literate. Little doubt, this is an important component of the education system. But is education merely the achieving of literacy targets? What indeed is the definition of literacy?
I personally think literacy should include more than just being able to read and write. It should be in regard to a lot of other things, whether you know how the country runs and even certain technical and scientific literacy. And all this should be coupled. The question of population, the question of environment, all those things are part of knowing how to live.
When a child or an adult is able to see a text as something meaningful, something which arouses a certain response in his or her heart, That's when I think the person becomes literate. And I think in that sense, literacy is a very powerful tool of education. Unfortunately, I think our primary schools as well as our literacy programs tend to emphasize the mechanical aspects of literacy at the expense of the aspects related to meaning.
Speak louder. Speak louder. What do you want? What do you want? The boys spoke louder than before. The gentleman. Perhaps we can find some words there. Said Shankar. The train arrived in the station and people came out in a crowd. The two boys saw a gentleman with a steel
कहानी का नाम है फूल तोड़ना मना है। कहानी का नाम है फूल तोड़ना मना है। ये हमारा बगीचा है, इसका ध्यान रखना है। तो कहानी का नाम है फूल तोड़ना मना है। क्या नाम बताया? फूल तोड़ना मना है। जॉनी जॉनी
Literacy rates have grown from 16.6% in 1951 to 36.24% in 1981. The number of literates increased fourfold, from 60 million in 1951 to 247 million in 1981. The number of illiterates, however, increased from 300 million in 1951 to 437 million in 1981. In the total spectrum of human development, early childhood learning represents one of the most critical periods, during which the foundations of all kinds of intellectual, cognitive, and emotional competence are built. As ever-growing numbers seek access to what has become the privilege, rather than the right to a good education, our young are crippled by premature regimentation.
You see, I think sending children to school very early is a very relative thing because it depends what kind of a school it is. I mean, if a child is ready to do a certain activity, to either read or to write, at the age of 3, I'm just taking arbitrary figures, I think it's fine. Some child may be ready at 4. The point is that the early years especially, things have to move much more slowly at the child's pace without pushing the child too much, where the child is able to cope with whatever the child's growth is.
I think by sending a child to a school, you are not ipso facto overburdening a child. But the school, if the school is not fully aware of the age level of the child, the mental maturity of the child, the general cultural requirements of the child, may do things which may effectively overburden the child.
I think one of the biggest problems today is that there are very few schools that are allowing a child a total experience of school. And inevitably, we all go back to this need for good marks, the need for a better performance academically, a child being judged more on scores than on anything else because of sheer numbers. There are sometimes 50, 55, 60 children in one section. We can theoretically say we will abolish exams in the primary classes, we will have a continuous evaluation system, but where is the time for any teacher to even get to know a student? I know of schools where at the end of the year, the teacher doesn't even know the names of some of those students. It's humanly impossible for a teacher to do that.
The tiger is a very dash anyone. यानी टाइगर कैसा जानवर है? कमजोर? कैसा है? ऊपर देखिए, यहाँ पर है सब अक्षर। बहादुर। कैसा है?
Enrollment in primary schools rose from 37.8% in 1951 to 97.86% in 1987-88. At the upper primary level, enrollment rose from 13% in 1951 to 55.14% in 1987-88.
अब हम इसको यहाँ जो खाली जगह है हमारी तो हम क्या चीज लिख सकते हैं? स्टिक। क्या चीज लिख सकते हैं? स्टिक। स्टिक means छड़ी। Stick means छड़ी।
We have adopted an insane policy on curriculum which is simply not child-centered. And because of this, we continue to live with the older kind of ideas where whatever knowledge is considered basic for children by adults is parceled into small bits and then is pushed down the children's throats.
The entire system is oriented towards exams, and once you finish with that, you forget what you've done last year and you go on to what you've done next year. We've not had any accumulation of knowledge. We've not been told to refer to outside sources. There's been no, they've not sparked off any interest for extra whatever. And so I don't feel I know enough. I know what I'm supposed to know. I know from chapter 5 to 10, but
our textbooks as such, they don't encourage you to think, and they are not very interesting. It just, in the end, all you have to do is you have to know everything by heart, that's all. I mean, it's not as if they are fostering in you a love for the subject.
I think we are not preparing them to think independently. I think that is one thing which, to think independently, to be able to react positively and creatively in new circumstances. Because this world outside there's no outside. This is world. This is the child's world here. Even here the child has to react and think independently. Similarly, as a child grows up, whether it is in the home, in the neighborhood, in the larger society, it's just that they are not independent thinkers.
Inevitably, everything depends on that one mark. And I don't know what one does to counter this. Eventually, we all come to the realization that it is those very marks that are going to either open a door for the child for the future or shut it firmly in his face. So, a child's poor performance scholastically becomes a matter of great concern. In some families, it's leading to scenes, it's leading to tension of the kind that parents begin to find unbearable. It's leading to severe communication breakdown between child and parent.
The exams are a hurdle because they expect a particular type of approach in the children and mastery of a particular type in each subject. But you know, in our system, in Delhi for example, there isn't an exam till the 10th class, for which you can start preparing from the 9th. Who stops you from doing what you want up to the 8th grade? Now, when you take 2 years of preschool and 8 years of formal schooling, you have 10 years during which to do wonders with the children. Are we doing it?
Not all teachers are motivated, or not all teachers are dedicated to what they are teaching. And due to the education system is not flexible at all. Even if she wants to do it, the teacher wants to do it, she can't change it. Like, she can't make the subject more interesting than what is given in the books.
There is a certain section of the teaching population which is not motivated, and for them the job is a convenience, which is why we are asked, do you do this because it's convenient? There are holidays, you come back at 2:30 and things like that. But it's not, I won't accept it as a generalization, because there are plenty of us who do our best to create some kind of interesting situation in the class, help the child to learn, to see things from another point of view.
In the best of places, you will not find everybody motivated, or certainly not equally motivated. But I think it's also a vicious circle. If you give something to the children and children respond very positively, there is a thrill in it. Then you want to give a little more of it. Then you get much more in return. I think that's how motivation, you are spurred on to doing things which one would say are professionally desirable things. That's one aspect. Secondly, you can use motivated teachers as catalysts. You get a highly motivated teacher, you get half a dozen who get motivated because of this person, and then you may have some more that are neutral. There would be gradations, and I think in 14 years of a child's life, the child will in turn get a very motivated teacher, a motivated teacher, a not so motivated teacher. The child also learns to enjoy a good harvest when it gets it, and take the others as they come.
An education system can only be as good as its teachers. India has failed to attract its best minds to the vigor of intellectual pursuit. A nation can grow only if it can reward and motivate its best to share and transmit that erudition and vision so that it can multiply itself.
हमारे यहाँ 368 स्टूडेंट्स हैं और टीचर्स हमें 5, 4+1, तो होने चाहिए यहाँ 10 टीचर्स. 5 टीचर्स की प्रॉब्लम है. इन्होंने ये कह रखा है कि भाई हम 1 महीने के अंदर भेज देंगे, लेकिन इनको फिर उतना हम नहीं स्टडी करा सकते जितनी कि हमें करानी चाहिए.
Inevitably, education is also a question of resources. Have we adequately recognized the crucial value of education as an infrastructural resource? As different priorities compete for limited resources. In evolving development priorities, has education received its due?
Compared to any other so-called developing country, India continues to spend the lowest amount of its gross national product on education. There is, as I said to you earlier, a general apathy towards education. Smaller countries, much smaller countries like Tanzania or Kenya have spent a far greater amount of their GNPs on education than we have.
The total investment in education has declined from 7.86% of the first plan to 3.55% of the seventh plan, while the expenditure in university education has increased from 140 million rupees in the first plan to 7,500 million rupees in the seventh plan. But the question is, what is the quality of higher education we provide to the future leaders of our community?
One might even say that the quality of education has fallen over the years because we have expanded too fast and we have not provided the facilities, necessary lab facilities, library facilities, proper faculty, proper infrastructure, buildings. Now you see, just creating a university does not ensure that a university is established. You have to make investment.
In this 91-year-old college, the total furniture grant is 12,000 only. Now, if we were to get our chairs gained, half the money will go there. So how should we improve the facilities? And environment counts a lot. There should be cleanliness, there should be clean desks, and we should have modern infrastructure like computer and so on. And it's a pity that such a prestigious college doesn't have even one computer which can help us streamline our office.
There is a resource crunch so serious and cutbacks sudden and seemingly arbitrary. A leading college in the capital felt obliged to threaten closure as a consequence.
We must begin to self-generate resources from within the university system. Our students who think very little of going to England or America at a very high cost, 2 lakh rupees, 3 lakh rupees, would be very startled to hear of a slight increase in fees.
The capacity to implement rational policies, even when these are frequently defined and articulated, is compromised frequently at the feet of populism. Is India and its future getting fair value for the money we spend on education?
Invariably, one tends to invest in areas which are more tangible, where an investment produces what would be a clear-cut financial economic return, whereas education is something which has a much longer gestation period, and the returns from it for the investments made are not as tangible, and therefore it tends to get neglected. There are also other aspects, and I think we must remember this. education is related to the society. You cannot expect education to have in it qualities of discipline, equity, secularism, and all the other things which constitute an ideal value system if it is not inherent in society. It is true that there will be leadership in the educational system, intelligentsia, and even those who may not come through the educational system, who have to provide these value systems for society. So the educational system can be, in fact, a pace setter.
No education is complete without engagement with social reality. And it is a matter of some anguish that we regard the university's excellence by its cognitive or contemplative qualities, by its contribution to knowledge, which I think is exceedingly important. But I think in a society like India, with massive violations of human rights, with abject misery that impoverishment brings, students and teachers have a wider social mission in addition to developing academic excellence. And I think there has got to be a confluence of social engagement for social change, active engagement for social change, and pursuit of high theoretical work.
Our effort is to provide them the education which will prepare them for the responsibilities that they have to handle in the future, and prepare them in a fundamental way, develop their intellectual capacities, ability to analyze, ability to look at a problem and solve it. If you look at the state of science and technology, things are changing very fast. If you give them an education which is very narrow in a given area, they will be able to remain in that area only for a very short period of time. And they will not be in a position to respond to the challenges that arise in the later period of their life. Time span is about 40 years for a professional. And therefore, we prepare students in a fundamental way, give them the best possible education, prepare their mind, then they take decisions about what they want to do. Now, the choices that they make depend upon their perception of what will provide them personal satisfaction and economic prosperity.
People complain, why do our IIT engineers go abroad? I've talked to a lot of them outside. And many of them told me that most of the things which they are doing while they are in India, they don't find examples of in the industry around. On the other hand, when they go, when they're doing something in the lab, they see that something's happening in the industry next door. And so I'm actually surprised that, not surprised that so many go out, but surprised that so many care to stay here. Because our policies are not quite consistent with the kind of people we are training.
You see, by and large, in India, higher education has not really performed the role it is supposed to perform. And by that I mean that, you have at the end of the entire process of higher education, through the processes of learning, we want an end product whereby you will have an individual who is capable of synthesizing information, who will be capable of analytically analyzing information that is available to him. This kind of processes of learning do not get initiated in Indian higher education. Now, in the recent past, of course, in the last decade or so, there's been a specificity of crisis in higher education. This crisis is getting reflected more and more in the absence of an academic rigor. Students rely on pre-digested textbooks. They are not ready to go in for a rigorous academic work of written assignments. Teachers, of course, also are not that demanding. It's partly because the system is generating that kind of attitude.
Ever since independence, committees and commissions have been set up to evolve policies in education. The most recent is the National Policy in Education of 1986, which is a comprehensive statement and includes ideas and ideals to reform and transform education in India.
The 86 policy was a bit of a mixed bag. It had some good ideas about improvement of the quality of school education. I'm particularly thinking of Operation Blackboard, which was taken up after a long gap in our planning regarding improvement of basic physical amenities in primary schools. And I think that was a good gesture made in the new education policy. I think it was not all that substantive a gesture, because I think the money needed and the effort needed for improving physical amenities in primary education are still very inadequate, but at least it was a good gesture. Similarly, the 86 policy, I think, made a good start by paying attention to improvement of teacher training at the elementary level, by thinking of district institutes of education and training, you know, in a situation where there's virtually there's a chaos in teacher training at the elementary level, which is again one of the most key factors responsible for keeping our standards so low in primary education. So I think that part and the promise that teacher education's highest body will be given a statutory status was another, you know, good gesture made, and I hope this new government is going to fulfill that promise made in the 86 policy.
When the new government was formed, they believed, and I think quite rightly so, that there are gross elitist aberrations in our education system, and that the 1986 policy does not take full note of that, and that it is not geared towards providing genuine equality of opportunity to all persons in the country, men and women, and of different classes. And it was mainly to give a work orientation, a vocational orientation, to give an egalitarian orientation, and to eliminate the elitist biases that it was decided to have a review of the education policy.
The 1986 policy was a fairly sound one. There was some problem or some controversy with regard to Navodaya schools. Okay. Now, my view therefore was, if you want to review that particular provision of the 86 policy, feel free to do so. But why do you want to review the whole policy? All that you will do is to produce a report which will be like the 1986 report. You see, the situation has not changed. And don't forget, the 1985-86 exercise was undertaken after 2 decades. The earlier exercise was in 64-66. So it's about, after about 15-20 years that you can think of a review. If you think of it earlier, what it really means is that you are not really grappling with the issues, and you are doing something where you are evading the issues, if I may say so.
We are in a general state of difficulty in our country, in the sense that the inequalities which we inherited from the British system, rather than being bridged, have widened. And therefore, whether it is in the system of healthcare, or whether it is in the demographic situation, or whether it is in the social system, general value system in the whole country, in all spheres, there is a situation of difficulty, of crisis. And that also gets reflected in the educational system. While it is true that the educational system should be able to make an intervention to overcome this problem, but this is a very, very slow process, and it requires a kind of determination which all of us have to come together to really assert and to ensure that education does become a means for communication of values, does become a means of reduction of inequalities, does become a means to create a new skilled manpower which facilitates economic development and which meets the economic opportunity which this country is now likely to offer.